Part of May Madness. Dad loved family. He was our biggest supporter. We were told when we were little, when he would leave the house in the morning, he would say to Mom, "Don't let anything happen to those girls." No pressure. I remember very few evenings Dad was home as he attended countless church meetings. But I do remember there was always time to be tucked in and a goodnight kiss. Some would say we were spoiled, but our daughter Christy would say we were just well loved. Dad didn't just love us, he also had a deep love for his extended family as well. His parents, his brother Doug, sisters Marion, Evelyn, and Dorothy, his brother-in-laws, sister-in-laws, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren. We grew up with a strong sense of and bond of a loving family. This bond has continued. Our church family was also important. Dinner time in our home was a special time of the day to gather. We'd share stories, past and present, and get caught up on the day's events. Dad would tell us stories about Dad growing up, the brother, pranking his sisters. Apparently he had a great aim with water on a spoon, always surprising his sister Dorothy. Building a tree house with his brother Doug out of Bed Springs, and fun times at their cottage in Cedar Springs. This was one reason our family tradition was started of a cottage. Our cottage on Moira Lake was filled with family fun, cousins, friends, adventures, and many, many laughs. Dad ensured that we all learned to swim, water ski, and operate a boat. I remember sitting down to dinner one night, food on the table, all ready to go, and no Mom. I think the conversation went something like this: "Where the heck is your mother?" Of course, there was no note anywhere. Well, Mom had gotten a call that baby Sarah Graham had arrived, and in her excitement, had forgotten to tell anyone as she rushed out of the house. When she returned after dinner, Dad's concern quickly turned to happiness that the baby had arrived. I sometimes think our dinner times could have been turned into a reality show. In between family stories, our phone never stopped ringing. Dad never complained, unless maybe it was a call for one of us. It was just our life. Dad was our go-to guy. If something needed to be fixed, a problem solved, he was our guy. We never thought to not volunteer him if he was available. When I was teaching at Cundall's, one year we went on strike and had to walk a picket line. Dad showed up on the line with his own sign, "Grandparents Care for Better Education," a first for him. He also brought donuts. Shortly after moving back to Barrie from Nova Scotia, our dog wandered away. You can imagine. 2 kids upset, crying, that was Todd and I, and his 2 grandchildren also upset, Christy and Corey. At 5 a.m., after a worrisome night, I got up to check to see if the dog had maybe made its way home. As I looked out in the dusk, I saw this car slowly scoping out the neighborhood. It was Dad. He had driven up from Brampton, thinking maybe he could find the dog. When we built our home in Snow Valley, Dad and Mom volunteered to help. They came out each day and would clean up after the workers. They became known as the assistant senior supervisors. All the work crew looked for them. Dad was also a caregiver. If something was unfair or unjust, he'd do his best to fix it. A few weeks ago, he said, "Donna, all my life I just wanted to help people. I'm not sure I did enough." I said, "Dad, you're 96, and I assured him he had. He was still bringing smiles to the staff. After breaking his hip, several caregivers told us what a difference Dad had made in their lives. Amazingly, when I was homesick at university, Dad would just happen to be in the area to cheer me up. Who knew that Hamilton was on the route to so many places? We moved to Barrie in 1963 from Uxbridge, and it was a difficult move for Dad. His parents were unwell, and we were leaving close friends. I remember as we were approaching Barrie, Dad trying to reassure us that we were going to love Barrie. First of all, our cousins, the Reeves, would be closer. They would be in Allendale. Uncle Dave was the minister at Burton Avenue. And secondly, Barrie had put up a special sign for us. So we passed the sign on the highway, and it said, "Welcome to Barrie, population 24,000. I'm not sure if the others in Barrie knew that that sign was just for us or not. Of course, we did love it here, and Central Church did indeed become a part of our extended family. The church flourished, and it was important for Dad that we be part of a caring community, and we were. Dad's time at Central was certainly a highlight for all of us. Dad loved to laugh, and he would share life stories that made us laugh. His first funeral, where the undertaker was a ventriloquist. You can imagine what happened in the hearse. His shared services with our uncle, when they'd get the giggles, etc. Dad was fun. He showed us what counted in life by doing. He could be counted on for support and help always. Wow, good job, Donna. Hi, I'm the middle child, daughter Diane, or Diane, as Dad would lovingly say. As difficult as it is to stand up here and try and hold myself together to speak about my memories of Dad, I felt that he deserved it, and I needed to make the effort. As the other two, Donna and Karen, are also speaking, there may be some overlap, as many of our experiences are as a family. Thinking of my own memories, they start in Uxbridge when I was between 2 and 7, and that was Dad's charge before Barrie. I remember nothing of Peterborough prior to that, hearsay only, of me plastering the newly painted manse walls with Vaseline, spreading Ajax all over the floors and walls, and coloring them and writing on them. As well, apparently Dad would quite frequently say, "I borrows Donna," so Mom would have to get Diane ready. But that's all hearsay, so that's inadmissible. What I do remember and can verify is the skating rink that Dad built in Uxbridge, and we had hours of fun there, eating rhubarb out of the garden that they had planted, and teaching Donna to ride a bicycle, and me begging for a turn. By the end of the day, Dad had gone back to the store and bought a second bicycle. I remember fun times with the Moore family in Uxbridge, and I remember singing "Jesus Loves Me, This I Know" way too loud in church, and the whole congregation laughing as Dad said, "Well, I guess someone really loves that hymn." And I remember Dad taking me to the jewelry store to buy my first ring. Dad was generous with his time, attention, and gifts, and he was always fun. He always joined in all the activities with us. He snow skied, he water skied, he golfed, he played tennis, and Mom and him used to play tennis on their dates about 75 to 80 years ago. We all have tons of memories of our summers at the cottage with our cousins and friends, of Dad taking all the kids, at least 9 of us, on a daily basis water skiing, and frequently for ice cream. I never heard him complain about gas, expenses for the boat, about complaining about painting or fixing things at the cottage, or getting rid of so many spiders, bugs, and snakes for his girls. He seemed to relax and enjoy his time there, and as Donna mentioned, he loved to laugh. Frequently in our household, we would come home to the lovely smells of baked goods, cakes and cookies. And we always had to ask, is this for us or is this for the church? And this particular day when I asked, Mom said, no, I'm sorry, that cake is for the church. So she and I continued to chat as Dad walked in from his day. And he sat down on the stool beside the counter and loosened his tie on his white shirt, and we asked him how his day had been. And with a sigh, he placed his arm and elbow on the counter to rest, nicely right in between the chocolate cake and and I'm sure there was a yell of, "Oh, drat, I'm sorry, Chris." But soon his laughter joined my hysterical laughter. I believe I was on the floor laughing. Our lives were busy, as Donna had said, and especially during high school with piano, sports activities, church activities, it was always go, go, go. So as a result, we were not early risers. And in the morning, we'd wake up with a yell from Mom and Dad's room, "Get up, we're late, hurry up." We'd all grab a cookie or a piece of cake, not the church's, or a muffin and run to the car, and we could make that trip to school in minutes. In high school years, Dad bought a second car so that Donna and myself and Mom could take us to different activities. Dad always filled the car up with gas, his car and our car, and I never once heard him complain or even mention it. He was always supportive, as Donna had said, and sometimes when things seemed unfair with teachers or coaches, there may have been a call or a visit behind the scenes. And I remember one time when our volleyball coach sat us all down and had a chat with us. And at the end, I looked over at my friend and said, "Uh-oh, I think my dad may have called." She said, "Yeah, it was probably either your dad or my mom." Years after I moved down east, I heard my dad talking to someone about the day that I had left to move. And he said he had stood on the grass outside our home and watched me drive away in a little car, little Honda Civic. And he said that was one of the saddest days of my life that I could remember. Who would have thought? But with Donna and Todd following suit and Karen deciding to go to university there, it soon became a second home for Mom and Dad. Dad would just pop down east to bring furniture or to help build an extra space or to fix something. And I recently said to him, "You know, Dad, some relatives and people thought that you really spoiled us too much with all your trips down east." And his reply was, "Oh, I know, Diane, but I just always thought, really, where better to spend my time?" Dad showed us his love and support, always, through sad times, the death of Donna and Todd's first baby, Christy's accident, and Brian's death. He was always there with his love
his understanding, his strength, and sometimes his tears, guiding us and helping us and lifting us up when we needed it. Through COVID, we FaceTime daily so that they could feel like they had visitors. The lack of socializing for Dad, and especially for Mom, was a real detriment to their health. Up until that time, Mom had her choir, the Simcoe Songsters, and the two of them had the seniors' luncheon at Collier. Even through COVID, Mom would rifle through her music and try and develop a new program for them when they would restart. And one day, when we FaceTime, I asked them what they had been doing that day, and they said they had taken their personal phone book and decided to call as many people as they could and sing, "I think you're wonderful," to all of them. And we can only imagine whose idea that was. But Dad seemed happy, and he participated and enjoyed it. My own special trips with Mom and Dad, we flew to California, San Francisco, we drove to LA, Vegas, and San Diego. I had done this trip before with my friends and loved it so much, I really wanted Mom and Dad to see it. They also arranged a cruise for the two of them and asked if I wanted to go and join them. We always got along. We never had any conflict. It was just very easy and fun. We had family trips to Arizona to see Christy, to Scotland to visit Mom's relatives, to Switzerland to visit Garth and family, and many more. My most special trip with Dad was to Israel when he led a tour group over there. I was lucky also to have my Uncle Doug, my brother-in-law Rick, girlfriend from work, friends like Rick and Kathy Irvin, and June Stone. And I remember one day on the trip as Dad and Uncle Doug served communion to us on the holy ground where Jesus had walked and had the Last Supper. And it was such a beautiful, meaningful setting. And I thought how very lucky I was to have this holy, lovely, sweet man, my father, and also my uncle before me in this setting. And I thought how proud I was, but how proud their father, who also was a minister, would have been of his two boys. I was very happy that I had taken the opportunity to be on that wonderful trip. Other times, of which were many, when I felt extra special was at my wedding, when my father not only could walk beside me down the path overlooking the ocean, but he could perform the wedding for us. And sadly, and secondly, he led the funeral for Brian. But it was comforting to have him there, to know what to do, and to have his steady love there lifting me up. His wonderful friends that came from Ontario to help him and our family, and my friends and cousins that flew in were all a great comfort. And when Mom and Dad and I would have our chats, sometimes about life events that were negative, we would always change the subject before the end so that we could end on a happy note. So in the last days, when pain persisted and Dad became teary, I could no longer hold back my own. And in case it was the last time, I said, "You know how much I love you, Dad. And I just think you were the best and most wonderful father." And as he looked at me, his tears stopped when he saw mine. And he said, "Well, Diane, there is a reason for that, you know. I was your only father." And he started to laugh at his joke, and then we both ended up laughing. And that's who my dad was. He always tried to lighten our burden and ignoring his own. I can't tell you how many times he thanked us for the phone calls and the visits. He said his family was his lifeline, and there were many, many late night calls to us all. And he would say, "Never, ever, ever, ever forget how grateful I am to you all. And I can never thank you enough for all you've done." And one night when we were leaving, after he'd thanked us many times again, he said, "You know, Diane, I just loved being your father. His faithful friends came weekly, and other friends and relatives frequently, and it boosted his spirits, and he laughed and chatted with them. It helped him, and it greatly helped us, because during that time, we could relax and not worry. The staff of Victoria Village would frequently say, "Your parents have the most visitors I've ever seen." And one day I heard that they had given a mental health test, and I wasn't sure why they would do that, but they asked if he would write a sentence. And I wasn't sure if he was able to, because he was legally blind and he had a lot of ailments. And so I said, was he able to write a sentence? And they said, oh yes, he passed with flying colors. And I said, well, do you know what he would have written? And they said, yes, he wrote, "God is good." He was the most grateful person I know. In spite of his ailments, he always found that part to be grateful for. He truly was thoughtful, kind-hearted, had a great sense of humor, would help anyone without hesitation, and there were times when he came home without shoes or jackets or sweaters. He taught us wonderful faith and values through his example and through how he and Mom lived. I have such great respect and love for the wonderful person I got to call Dad. I will hold on to all your values, love that you have instilled in me. You lived by example. You have set the stage well. You and Mom and what I have seen from you will always be the wind beneath my wings, always keeping me up when I need it. Thank you, Dad and Mom, for all you have shown me and all the blessings that you have given me.
Two down, one J girl to go. Now I know that Donna said she was daughter number 1, but that just means she was the firstborn. I bet you, if you were in Mom and Dad's presence, you would have felt that you were number 1 as well, because that's how they made you feel. And Mom had some words of wisdom before we got married, and it was, make your partner number 1 in your life and make your kids believe they are. And I know that they were great words of wisdom, but when the grandchildren came along, I bet they thought they were number 1, and when each of you were with them, I know that you felt that way too, except when the phone rang, and then that person was number 1, because our phone always rang. I thought what I would do is just share some of the lessons that I learned from my dad. And again, it's really hard to speak about one without the other, but let's give it a try. My first lesson was quitting is not an option. I didn't like school. To say that I didn't like school is really an understatement. I didn't like kindergarten. I mean, it was only half a day, but you had to take a towel and lay on the floor, the hard floor, and have a nap. What was the point of that? I could have thought of so many other things that I wanted to do, and going to school wasn't one of them. And then I didn't really like school in grade 1 or 2 or 3, and I kept asking Dad if I could quit. And finally he said, you know, Karen, quitting is not an option. It's the law. You have to go to school. If he had just said that in kindergarten, it might have been a shorter story. But the next lesson would be do what makes you happy. And so what made me happy was on a winter Sunday morning, you know, when all my friends were getting their perfect Sunday school attendance pins, because we didn't have sports teams on Sundays back then, and the stores weren't open. And so you had to go to church, or that was part of our life, was to go to church. And so he would often say to me, you know, Karen, I know you really are happy when you're out in nature, so why don't you go skiing today, and I'll meet you at the chapel at 2. So Dad was volunteer minister at Horseshoe Valley Ski Resort Chapel, and you could ski and then kick off your skis and then go up to the chapel with all your ski garb on And so that's what I enjoyed doing. And I was very grateful for those moments where he would encourage me to do that. Other days he would say, you know, I know you really like to write in your journal and write poetry and songs, and why don't you go down to the lake or take the car and go to the cottage? Now, I'm not sure if Donna and Diane had those same options, but I was very grateful that he would encourage me to do that. Other things that made me happy were singing and, of course, time at the cottage. And we were lucky, as the girls said, to have a cottage where all our families were there, some of our J-side cousins. And I don't know if you know this, but there were 12 cottages, and they were all ministers. So you can imagine the fun and the antics that we got up to. But I remember family get-togethers with cousins, and we would have campfires and sing songs and rounds, and we would have so much fun singing. Well, we also had a 3-hour drive to the cottage, and so I would sing that whole 3 hours. And I would make up songs about the cows and the trees and everything I saw along the way, and it kept me amused. But Donna and Diane, I recall, saying, "Dad, can you make her stop singing?" And he would say, "She's happy, let her sing." So I'm grateful for that. A few days before Dad died, we were singing in the sunroom, and Aunt Evelyn was playing the piano, and Ian, Donna and Todd, Diane, Rick, myself, and the Moffats were there. We were singing a lot of the campfire songs and favorite hymns of praise, and Dad was singing too. And we sang him happy birthday because we knew that in 2 weeks' time he would be 96. And he joined in, and at the end he said, "You've just made my day." He said, to be with family and friends so dear. He really was grateful. And you know, Dad loved to harmonize. One of his favorite carols was Joy to the World, and he loved to do harmony to it. Another lesson I learned was, don't let fear stop you from doing anything. I can only imagine how Dad felt when he discovered that he had macular degeneration and was going to lose his sight. Can you imagine? My dad loved to drive. He loved to come and visit. There were times when Donna would call and say, "Dad, can you bring my, sunfish or whatever it's called, sailboat to Nova Scotia and go camping with us in PEI?" And he would jump in the car and drive it down. And there were times when Rick and I would call and say, "Listen, we thought we'd go camping at a place called Acres of Wildlife," which really means in the middle of nowhere, in Maine. And Dad would jump in the car and come and see us. Or there was another time when my son Jamie was having a hard time because Mom and Dad said goodbye to them at the school bus and then left. Now, Jamie didn't really like goodbyes, so we used to say hello until next time. And Grandma and Grandpa left right afterwards, and the kids went off on the bus. And then they called, so that was a Tuesday. They called on Wednesday night when they finally arrived home and said, "How's it going?" And I said, "Well, Jamie hasn't stopped crying since you left." They did their laundry, hopped back in the car, and drove back to Nova Scotia, and by Friday, they were there. So they did love driving. Imagine that fear when he was going to have to lose his license. I remember when I was about 5 years old, and I was afraid to go water skiing. Now, we loved being in the water. We swam every day, we tubed and canoed and did all sorts of things. But I remember being afraid to try water skiing. And I was really good at what if. Well, what if I fall? Well, what if I can't get up? Well, what if I do if I'm in the middle of the lake? And Dad just waited me out. He was really good at that. So once I got comfortable with it, he took me water skiing, and he was right all along. I loved it. And we enjoyed a lot of time on the water. And Dad, as Diane and Donna have said, was very patient. He would take people 2 and 3 times, and we would go over and under, and two people at a time, 3 people at a time. And then when the Coburn family showed up, Bud Coburn would always bring something fun for us to do. So he would bring a windsurfer or scuba gear or trick skis, and we would have lots of fun doing those things. Another time I remember being afraid or nervous was we all took lessons from the Davies, piano lessons, Donna, Diane, and I. And Mom took singing lessons. And they were known as the Davies of Canada because before they settled here, they performed concerts all across the countryside. So part of taking piano lessons was that you also had to perform. And they had big concerts in school auditoriums, and you know how many people they hold. And you had to perform in one of these concerts, either in December or June. Now, for a whole month before the concert, you had to go up on stage, practice curtsying, and go up to the piano, play your piece, go back, curtsy, and then go sit down. This one particular time, they made me do a duet with Diane. I don't know what they were thinking. I always got nervous. I always went through the what ifs. What if I trip? What if I fall? What if I can't remember the words to the song? Because they all had to be memorized. And so Diane and I practiced. We went up, curtsied together, went to the piano. But the night of the concert came along, and Diane must have had cement in her shoes because she took forever to get up to the front. So I curtsied, went to the piano, sat down, turned around. She was just coming up the stairs. She curtsied. I thought, oh my gosh, I should go curtsy again. So I curtsied again. So she curtsied, I curtsied. It was sort of one of those experiences, you know? And then we played the piano, and then the very last note, we both played the wrong note. And we rolled off the stage in laughter. We just could not contain ourselves. But that's really who the J Girls are. We could never sit in church together. We all had to sit in different places. So for those of us that remember, I used to sit in the front row, and Donna and Diane were all over the place. Anyway, that was sort of a J Girl thing. We really had trouble. But we came by that honestly, because as Donna mentioned, or Diane, Uncle Dave and Dad were no better off in church. In the small countryside churches outside of Tweed or Madoc, where we had our cottage, Dad and Uncle Dave would often go for Sunday services. And as the stories go, they would take turns singing the hymns. So Dad would sing one verse while Uncle Dave tried to get his act together, and then they would take turns going back and forth. For the most part, we were well behaved, but there were those occasions when we just couldn't hold it together. I know that Dad always wanted us to do the Christmas Eve services, and they were such special services at the church. We really loved them, but he always wanted us to be up at the front as a family, and we would really try and encourage Dad to showcase other well-deserving families, and you can understand why when you know how much trouble we had holding it together. There was one occasion when one of these concerts happened, and we felt so fortunate. We were sitting at the back, in the back row. And, you know, that we just thought that was the safest place for us to be. But, you know, they taught elocution, which is really enunciating your words clearly, and it really just got the best of me. And I was sitting on Dad's lap, and Donna and Diane were beside him, and we couldn't stop laughing. A woman in front of us turned around and said, "Do you know that that's someone's mother up there singing?" And we said, "Yes, it's our mother." Mom was singing in Russian or German or I don't know what language, but she just ignored us and kept on singing, as she so eloquently did. You know, my dad was really good friends with the Moore family in Uxbridge, and you know, they had a lot of fun times together too. They went to Israel together, to the Middle East, and they went to Europe together as well. And they also came to see us in Nova Scotia when we all moved there. And Bert would bring his truck, and they would have a sign that said, "J. Moore Construction. Don't mess it up, let us do it for you." And so they had a lot of fun too. The other lesson I think I would say is that my dad was a possibility thinker. So if there was a challenge, he really saw it as an opportunity. Anything was possible. He had a will, and he had the way to do it. And he would probably figure out the right person to do the job. And I would bet that there were a lot of people in his congregation that were convinced to do things that they never knew they wanted to do. In fact, I know that Diane, I think, referred to high school. Well, I remember being in a high school math class with a teacher that was, let's say, less than encouraging about if you didn't understand what was happening. And so I clearly wasn't understanding what was happening. And before you know it, I got moved to another class. And I loved math. The teacher was great. He was a fabulous teacher. And a friend of mine, Anne, who I believe is here today, said, Karen, how did you get moved? And I said, well, I think my dad might have made a trip to the office. And she said, well, I thought it was impossible to get moved from one class to another. I said, you don't know my dad. Her dad must have been good too, because she got moved as well. Show up, it's the right thing to do. I remember having conversations with my dad about death. I really remember saying that I wasn't really comfortable with the options, like, cremation and burial. Wasn't there something else that we could do? And aquamation doesn't sound too good either. But I remember, talking to Dad very openly about that, and I'm not sure if he knew about exposure therapy, but I think that was what he ended up doing in the end. I remember Dad telling me about when his father was dying, that his dad tried to have a conversation with him, and my dad wasn't ready to talk about it. And when my dad was ready, his dad didn't want to talk about it. And he shared this with me to say that when someone is ready to have a difficult conversation on a topic that makes you uncomfortable, it's not about you. So, ready or not, hold space and let them talk. There were several times when this topic came up, when families in the church experienced a loss, and there was a teenager in the family my age or a child in the family. Dad would say, come on, Karen, let's go to visitation. And I'd say, what do I do to comfort people, Dad? And he'd say, you don't have to do anything. You just have to show up. We each have gifts, and there are many ways to minister. I remember talking to my dad about, should I go into the ministry or what should I do? And he said, Karen, you're working with deafblind children and special needs. And he said, as long as every person follows what they're passionate about in life, then you're serving a purpose. So many years ago, I was at a family gathering, and a cousin of mine asked what my dad thought of my sister and I doing mediumship readings and exploring spirituality. I said, I don't know, let's ask him. So I called Dad over and I said, David has a question for you. And without hesitation, my dad said, I totally believe it, 150%. He went on to say, there's all sorts of stories in the Bible of angels, like Angel Gabriel telling about the announcement of the birth. And he said there's stories too of messages people have received over the years. And sometimes we don't understand where the messages that we get come from. He said, in all the years that I was a minister, he said, I felt that my sermons were coming to him, not from him. And he told of occasions when I knew things or Diane knew things, and we really had no explanation for it. He also said that when his mom was dying, she told my dad before his death that he would be accepting a call to Barrie. And my dad said, I'm not going to Barrie. I haven't received any calls, and I'm so happy in Uxbridge. We have good friends and a good church family. And she insisted and said it would be good for my dad, it would be good for our family, it would be good for the church family, and that we would have many happy years here. And we know how that turned out. He also told David that there were many ways to minister to help others. Sometimes we don't know how things are possible, and he was proud of us. So my last one really is to serve others. Several years ago, I was talking with my parents and asked them which of the following words resonated with them the most and why. So here's the list: God, Spirit, humanity, compassion, spirituality, religion, universe, hope, faith, love, kindness, or something greater than you. My parents were silent for a moment and reflected on those words. and then responded. My dad said, hope. He said, faith is belief without proof, and that works for many, especially those with a solid foundation. But he said, hope is what gets people through the dark times. Hope that there will be answers to the questions people are seeking. Hope that perhaps someone will come and help them. Hope that tomorrow would be better. Hope is what helps people keep going. My mom's response was love. She said at the end of the day, love is what gives life meaning. To love someone or something, or to love what you do, that's the greatest gift. I know that my parents loved family, extended family, those that came to live with us, their friends, their faithful visitors, and they treated the church as a family. My mom has a wonderful gift of music, which she shared with many people over her years. And for Dad, the gift of ministry and serving others, that's what he was called to do. They lived well, they laughed often, and they loved and served others well.
Good afternoon. My name is Christopher J. Moore, youngest son of Karen and Rick, which also makes me the youngest son of Donald and Christina J. Today I will be sharing some of the fond memories of our grandfather on behalf of myself and my brother Jamie. My entire family knows that as a child, I had a catchphrase. My catchphrase was, "It's not fair." Usually because my older brother or two cousins were getting to do something that I thought that I should be able to do as well. One such slight, if you may, was that Christy and Corey got to live in Barrie with my grandparents all year round. Jamie and I only got to see them for 2 months a year. Later in life, we have now reflected on that, and we realized that we were the lucky ones. You see, for every summer in our childhood, our grandparents were 4 houses down the street we affectionately know as their Nova Scotia cottage. Here are a few memories from those summers. Our days would normally start with Jamie and I hopping on our bikes and making the long trek, the 4 houses down to Grandma and Grandpa's house. We would then partake in a well-balanced breakfast of waffles and maple syrup, which we just called having waffles with Grandma and Grandpa. Occasionally, I would ask Grandpa if I could have ice cream on my waffles because I always felt that he was the more likely one to say yes. He did not always say yes. After that, we would be off to our daily activities, to which there was always many, whether we were going to swimming lessons or swim team, sailing or golf, you name it, we were always going somewhere. Well, this meant that Grandpa was often our personal chauffeur. He'd pull into our driveway with the freshly turtle-waxed green Buick Regal, which we aptly named the boat, and off we would go for the day. Grandma, of course, always by his side. Jamie and I remember Grandpa for his joy of life, and through recreation, we all have very special memories with Grandpa. Golf was one such activity that he loved. I can speak for Corey, Jamie, and myself that when Grandpa played golf with his grandsons, it was extra special. He was a member of the Blue Nose Golf Course in Lunenburg for many summers, and Jamie recounts Grandpa's 5-wood was the reigning supreme club of choice, whether it was off the tee or next to the green. Blue Nose Golf Course is also where Jamie and I had our first near-death experience, also with Grandpa. On a particularly foggy July summer's day, it was just the 3 of us, Grandpa, Jamie, and myself. After finishing the 8th hole, I had asked Grandpa if I could drive the cart from the 8th hole green to the 9th tee block. It was all of about 30 yards, so what could possibly go wrong? Well, as I mentioned, it was a foggy Nova Scotia day, and if you know what wet grass and golf carts do, you'll see where this story is headed. Throw in a slight downhill from the green to the tee block and a 75-foot cliff at the end, and we're off to the races. Jamie and I jumped in the cart, floored the gas, and took off to the tee. About halfway there, we slammed on the brakes and the cart kept going. And it kept going and going, finally coming to a rest mere feet from the edge of this cliff. I remember looking back and thinking, uh-oh, we're definitely in trouble now. Grandpa, who was running, had stopped and was now walking with a big grin on his face. His only words were in true Grandpa fashion. "I think I better drive from here on out, guys. And Chris, let's not tell the club host that you were driving at all today." We broke into hysterical laughter, and this became the time the golf cart almost went off the cliff at the Blue Nose Golf Course. We spent many summer weekends traveling around Nova Scotia to its world-class beaches, and whether it was Rissers, Crescent, Green Bay, Somerville, or our particular favorite, Carter's Beach, I know that Grandpa loved going there with us. And he especially liked it when the whole family was there. I say whole family because I don't remember many of those excursions that didn't include Aunt Di, Uncle Brian, and if we were very lucky, our cousins would also be in town. There are many weekend trips and a few longer ones as well, and one particular special memory is when Grandpa and Grandma had just arrived in Nova Scotia for the summer. They had learned that we had missed our dad because he had been away on the Blue Nose for quite some period of time, and they arranged for us to drive back to Ontario and meet with Dad in the Blue Nose in Prescott, where we were lucky enough to be the only passengers on Blue Nose from Prescott to Kingston, taking in the Thousand Islands. This is an all-time memory that Jamie and I share solely with our grandparents. There are many more memories that we would like to share today, but as Corey and Jamie noted earlier this week, while golfing, I should add, there's a lifetime of memories with Grandpa, and not enough time today to discuss. There's New Year's Eves, many birthdays, and special Christmases that we will spend years talking about, I'm sure. I wanted to end on a final thought and perhaps Grandpa's greatest teaching. Although he never verbalized this, we know this is true by the way he lived each and every day. You don't have to be a rich man in order to be a generous man and generous to other people. Grandpa, as we all know, was as generous as they come. And while he didn't have oodles of money, he offered whatever he had in abundance to anyone who needed it. Grandpa will be remembered for his generosity of faith to all those who attended the thousands of services over the years, who were lucky enough to be married by him or have a loved one celebrated by him. His generosity of spirit and enthusiasm for life and recreation, which he has successfully passed down to his kids and grandkids. His generosity of encouragement to pursue your goals and dreams or whatever the task is at hand. And of course, his generosity of providing a safe haven for those in need of a place to relax and reset from everyday life and its turmoil. I'll close by saying goodbye, or see you soon, Grandpa, but with one of Grandpa's own affirmations. There's many translations of this. It translates to, "Well done, I'm proud of you, way to keep pushing through," and many other translations that the family knows. So to Grandpa, on a life very well lived, as an extreme man of faith, a wonderful husband, a great father, and the best grandfather I could have asked for, I say, good show, Grandpa. Good show.
Hello, everybody. I've just arrived back in Canada, and we've built a cottage in Honey Harbor. And 2 nights ago, I saw the most beautiful thing, fireflies. I've never seen fireflies besides in the movies. So naturally, I had to Google fireflies. And they're the magnificent creature that reminds us that the small, simple things in life are what matter the most. And they inspire us in the moment to slow down, ground ourselves in the moment, and appreciate all that surrounds us. My grandpa, even though I know I shared him in this room with many of you, was not just a grandpa. He was a granddad, a father, a friend, a spiritual advisor. Never made it felt like you were being shared at that time, just like many of my mom and aunts have mentioned. You were the most important in that moment. Just like fireflies, one that lands on you becomes part of your chosen tribe. And if you were part of my grandpa's tribe, you were one of those special fireflies. I was the first grandchild and the favorite granddaughter. I'm also the only granddaughter. Corey and I didn't grow up initially at the same town or even in the same province, but I never remember him missing a birthday or an important celebration or a game. We had sleepovers at their house in Brampton, either enjoying our favorite fudgesicles or creamsicles that always seemed to be in abundance in the freezer. We went apple picking on drives in an extremely clean and recently shined car, and I always saw a perfectly folded chamois in the back of his car. During sleepovers, we would go to his church and run around. One thing that fascinated me always was the sign on his door that said Dr. Donald J. Who thought he was a doctor? I didn't think he was a doctor. Now, I didn't think he was a real kind of doctor at the time, but now in my older, wiser years, I have come to believe that yes, it was true. He was a doctor. He healed, counseled, and helped so many people in his lifetime. Growing up, we would attend church together as a family, especially for Christmas Eve celebrations. This one particular service, just like my mom and my aunts, cousins should also not sit together in church. We were here in the back. Somehow we got placed in the back, Christopher and Corey and Jamie and I, and a fly on a lady in front of us. Again, we felt bad for my grandpa as the rest of us were in the back of the church in stitches, but it was one of those fun memories, and Grandpa knew that's where my family's gonna be, and they're gonna be in giggles. The other times, speaking of giggles, my poor grandpa put up with us for all of our years, especially during grace before dinner. No matter who stood next to who and who would hold a hand, there would be a squeeze and a snort, and everyone would be laughing even before he was done. For multiple summers, Corey and I were lucky enough to road trip to Nova Scotia from Barrie and spend several weeks with them. We would entertain Grandma and Grandpa with the song that never ends and stop and eat and bathroom break at every McDonald's between Barrie and Halifax. I remember him saying once, "I have to stop to gas up." And of course, Corey and I laughed so hard because we thought it was some sort of fart joke. When my grandpa moved back to Barrie, we got to spend even more time with them. And you could see my grandpa at one of Corey's games with his cap on and watching the game, while my grandma paced the hallways because she couldn't stand to see my brother and Annette. Now, every morning when I was in my early 20s, I would drive down to Newmarket, and every morning my commute would start with a phone call to my grandma and grandpa. We would talk about the weather, whether I felt they should be driving that day, and my grandpa would tell me he stayed up half the night worrying about the snowstorm and me driving to Newmarket, so I knew that I needed to call every morning. That turned into tradition for over 19 years. As the morning calls continued and the years went by, the conversations turned to knowing how Brady was, and then it really only turned to knowing how Kylie was, and then before the end of the conversation they'd say, "Oh yeah, and how are you doing?" When my grandparents moved from their house in Barrie to the condo, my grandpa was very upset he wouldn't have a lawn to cut anymore. Granted, at this time, his macular degeneration was not great, and his eyesight was not well. So my grandma would drive him to our house in Phelpston, where we gave him our riding lawnmower, and he would cut our grass. The lines started diagonally, but then were a little wonky, and then it was just fine. Brady was just happy he didn't have to cut the grass himself. Now, there's a name that we used to call my grandparents, the dynamic duo. There's a certain helper term, but I'm not sure it's politically correct to use these terms here in church and in 2024. They were our special helpers during all of our time. I am one of the many in this room who were baptized, confirmed, and married, all by my grandpa. He was the keeper of the engagement ring, holding it like the Secret Service and going down multiple times a day to his desk to make sure no one had stolen it. My grandpa also loved a good fashion show, or at least pretended to love a good fashion show. So after a shopping haul, he'd sit and he'd watch all the trying on of all the outfits. So much so, he was the only male that came along while I was wedding dress shopping. He was also the one that insisted that he buy my wedding dress. In 2014, when my grandparents found out they were going to be great grandparents, they suddenly found more energy. They even came to the hospital in the middle of the night, not even knowing when they could meet Kylie. Kylie had quite the bond with them too. Going for sleepovers, Sorry. Coming for Halloween and making forts. I didn't know someone in their late 80s could spend so much time under a kitchen table. Brady and I were so worried that something would happen to Kylie, or them, not Kylie, them, when Kylie would go for sleepovers, we taught her how to call 911, just in case. When Lexi was born during COVID in 2020, they were the first to meet her as soon as we came home from the hospital. There are so many stories and so many moments as I had him for 41 years in my life. What an honor for me. My grandpa was a leader, a true demonstrator of important family values such as family and the importance of giving back in community. These are just some of the values that I will pass on to my kids. Let us remember him as a beacon of light in our lives, much like the firefly on a warm summer night. Grandpa's spirit illuminated the darkness, bringing joy and warmth to all that knew him. Like a firefly's gentle glow, his presence flickered with love and wisdom. As we bid farewell to this beautiful soul, let us carry his light within us, knowing that his legacy will continue to shine bright in our hearts forever. Rest in peace, dear Grandpa, our eternal firefly.
What an emotional roller coaster this is. Oh, I don't even know where to begin. So Grandpa, he was very, very well respected. Obviously, this many people here. This is really good. I don't know. I definitely will not have this many people at my funeral when it happens. I'm hoping to bring a little more upbeat to the speeches or the talks. That's what he would want. You know, he was really able to find humor in everything, whether it was good, bad, terrible. He found humor. So I just wanted to show or talk about a few different stories when, you know, he might have not got what I was trying to go for, or he might have no idea because of the age gap, but he always went along for the ride. So there's this one time I went over and I said, Grandpa, I need to borrow your trench coat and your hat. And he goes, what are you doing? I said, well, it's for a Halloween costume. And he said, well, what are you being? I said, well, I'm going to be a creepy old man. And he goes, okay, well, what else do you need? I said, no, that's it. He goes, well, what else are you going to wear? I said, no, that's it. I'm wearing the trench coat and the hat. That's my costume. And he thought about it, and then he just started to laugh. So anyway, he's probably thinking I was ridiculous, which I was, but it was really nice that he partook in that. As Chris mentioned, and he did a really good job, obviously we all golfed. He shared a passion for golf. I love golf. I wish I could enjoy how he enjoyed it and not got frustrated. He'd hit a bad shot and say, oh, drat. When I hit a bad shot, well, I can't repeat what I say. So, so he's really, really good-spirited there. One thing I wish I got from him was how well prepared he was for everything. Not sure if you guys can tell, but I'm not as prepared as everyone else is in their speeches. So I'm just trying to talk from the heart. But, I got a funny story to end it, but one nice thing Christy had mentioned about being able to get married by him, and Megan and I were also able to have him do our service, and it was really, I'm tearing up, I told myself not to do this, but anyway, it was really special that he is able to marry us. It was his last wedding that he got to do, so, he saved the best for last, because I am obviously the favorite grandchild out of everybody, not just the favorite girl, but the favorite grandchild, just to let you guys know. Anyway, so he was immaculate with his cars. He did, they talked about the great big green Buick, and he did lose his eyesight, so he did end up giving it to me as for my first car. But this thing, it was Buick Regal, big suspension. You kind of really sit down in on it. So I always called it Papa Couch, because it really felt like you're just sitting in a Chesterfield couch, nice and comfortable. But it was really nice that he's able to pass that on, and that was his love, so to be able to pass it down, and you know, just his joy of being able to see me happy and his family happy is really what I remember from him. And now as a parent, I really do see that you could care less about what everyone's doing or what they want to do. You just want to be there. You just want to be there and participate with them and really enjoy life with them. So I could tell that's probably why all the crazy ideas that I had, he always supported, because he was just happy I was there. So anyway, that's all I want to say. So thanks.
Try and speak quickly. Corey brought the jokes, I'm bringing the props. Words can't begin to describe how much I loved Uncle Don. Now, I have perfectly fine parents of my own, but with Aunt Chris and Uncle Don, I felt like a son, as did my brothers. I was privileged to live with the Barrie Jays twice. I moved with them here to Barrie in 1963 when I was 3, and my family traveled for almost a year. I don't recall that year, but pictures show a happy little boy. Cousin Karen and I, who are about the same age, and of course much younger than Diane and Donna, were friends and rascals. We got into a neighbor's RV and split a chocolate bar, except the joke was on us because it was chocolate-flavored X-Lax. Instead of toddlers on the run, we were toddlers with the runs. After university, I bought a struggling milk distributorship and happily moved into the Jay's basement. It was hard going, and J-Way distribution just about killed me. My BA degree, aka bugger all, had no business courses, and the family business, religion, wasn't much good other than helping me pray for a miracle each day. If the Collingwood route truck was overloaded, I'd take a truckload of milk to the Loblaws and hit the midnight crew, a minimum 4-hour trip. Immediately, Uncle Don suggested he come. I protested, but just a little. I thought he could help me stay awake. He asked to learn to drive the truck. Well, not much learn to teach, other than brake early and take corners slowly, and legal if I was supervising. We talked a while, and the next thing I remember was Uncle Don waking me up at the Loblaws store. So much for supervising. Despite protesting, he insisted on helping unload. I was worried about his heart, as slugging milk is tough, and of course Uncle Don was a bit heavy, and he had that passion for chocolate bars. There was always one in his glove box for chocolate emergencies. This is where my little prop comes in. I gave him a milk hook and demonstrated how you hook the bottom stack of 5 milk crates. Only gravity holds the 5 together, the hook pulls the bottom, and you put your hand on the top to balance. If the stack goes over, there's 80 liters of milk that literally explodes. Well, of course, 10 minutes later I hear, oh, 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 and I look over to witness that magnificent white liquidy explosion. Uncle Don was horrified and offered to pay. I assured him it was the milkman's rite of passage and that now he would smell like one too. I can tell you this, he never dropped another stack. Another Collingwood night slugging milk, I noticed a Loblaws employee staring at him. I said, by the way that guy's been eyeing you, he either has the hots for you or he knows you. Well, of course, turned out to be a member of his Barrie congregation, but that poor guy could not figure out who Uncle Don was. He saw him for an hour every week, but he couldn't figure out who he was. But after all, it was 1 a.m. in a stinky Loblaws back room, probably stinky from Uncle Don's earlier milk bomb explosion. He was slugging milk like a pro, and it was in Collingwood, way out of context for his beloved minister. They had a great laugh over that. Uncle Don loved to laugh. With him laughing so hard he was crying. That was always my favorite Uncle Don laugh. A personality theory paradigm that I love is Gary Chapman's 5 Love Languages. Hope you've all read it. Gary asserts that people have a primary love language. I assert that Uncle Don was a rare human who was ambi-love language dextrose, a poster child for all 5. Indeed, Uncle Don displayed most of them during our countless midnight milk runs. Those trips represented his love languages of quality time and acts of service. If I was feeling especially vulnerable, which was often, his big Don J. bear hugs, I hope you all got one at some point, the love language of physical touch, would keep me going. As he drove and we chatted, he'd give me words of affirmation, as I was 50% sure I couldn't survive J-Way, and he was 100% sure I could. I had 2 symbolic milk hooks chromed. They're usually rusted, crusted, and stink of sour milk, one for each of us. I can't tell you how much he appreciated the gesture. the receiving gifts love language. That was 40 years ago, and even as they downsized to a condo, he prioritized keeping this. Indeed, this isn't my hook. I lost mine a long time ago. This was Uncle Don's. Again, words can't express how much that makes me feel. I'm not the only person they took into their basement. My brother Ian lived with them summers driving ice cream trucks. Ian has many stories. At the reception, ask him about the Peterborough trip, the clerical collar, and the gas station. But the story that gets Ian emotional was about cars. With Ian and Uncle Don, no surprise there. Our father custom ordered new cars so that he could remove options, including power steering, if you can believe it. Uncle Don bought lovely secondhand cars with all the toys. When Ian was 14 at the cottage, Uncle Don suggested he move and park Aunt Chris's fully loaded 1954 Bel Air. Our cottages have rocky, treed, and uneven lanes. Not the best place to learn. But Uncle Don knew how much it would mean to Ian, and most critically, he trusted Ian. 55 years later, Ian cherishes this milestone in his relationship with Uncle Don and his life in general. Other boarders that weren't family quickly became family. John Satch McDonald lived with them for 2 years going to college. He started out referring to Dr. J, and of course ended up calling him Uncle Don to this day. Years later, when Uncle Don married Satch and Norma, Aunt Chris sang a solo. And then years later again, Uncle Don baptized their 2 children. Satch and Uncle Don shared many special quality time and acts of service hours together, and I quote, Uncle Don and I would go to Horseshoe Valley every Sunday afternoon and perform the service in their chapel, and then go skiing. Well, not as much fun as slugging stinky milk at 2 a.m., but, to each his own. Satch considers it a privilege to have known his and my Uncle Don. No greater tribute can you make. Someone introduced to Uncle Don during those very same Horseshoe Valley services was Greg Weeks, who boarded with the Jays for 2 years during high school. Greg and I overlapped in the Jays' basement, and to be charitable, I'd characterize him as a bit of a prankster. For instance, I vaguely remember awaking to my bed being lassoed and dragged across the floor. Echoes of the prankster can be heard in these words of Greg's. Don showed me that adult men who wear formal robes and speak from a pulpit on Sunday mornings to a large audience can actually be very down-to-earth and friendly. I grew to know Don as a gentle, patient man with a kind nature, which I'm sure I tested at times when I was a boarder in their home. During the reception, be sure to ask Greg about the amusing story of the ingenious, or shall I say devious way, the entire J family used the singing of Happy Birthday. Finally, my favorite personality theory quote is by the late Maya Angelou. I've learned that people will forget what you've said, people will forget what you did, but people will never forget how you made them feel. Uncle Don's superpower was to know how to make everyone, including random boarders in their basement, feel special, appreciated, and much loved.
For those of you who don't know me, my name is Alf Dick, and I am a friend of Don J. How can mere words adequately describe our friend Don J? When my wife Ruth and I originally came to Barrie in 1962, we were lifelong Anglicans, but after a while drifted away from that church. And during that process, we came to live in our first house in Barrie on Ottaway Avenue, and several of our neighbors told us that they attended and enjoyed this United Church called Central United, and its minister, a fellow named Donald J. As it happened, I had become involved with the Barrie Wyoming WCA, as it was then known, on its board of directors, and I found this fellow, Don J., to be a director too. He was genial, respectful, with a positive approach to things. I liked him so much that when the Y rules required that he resign after 2 terms, I was able to continue his influence by getting his wife, Chris, on the board, who of course added her own good thoughts and ideas as well. In due course, Ruth and I started to attend Central United, and we were favorably impressed by Don's emphasis on the importance of family, whether it be in his many references to the central family or in his devotion to his own family. And we enjoyed his sermons, which were beautifully presented, meaningful, always relevant, and often very timely too. Always genial, calm, tolerant, and quietly persuasive. He got Ruth and me involved at Central, and we got to know his wife, Chris, the super saleswoman. I've always said that Chris could sell refrigerators to people who live in the Arctic. Chris got me and many others in the Central family then involved in some variety shows called April Antics or May Madness, depending on the month in which they were produced. Now, in all of this, Don was always involved. I'm not sure completely willingly, often quizzical, maybe reluctant, but up for anything. He was, for example, an Egyptian mummy. He was an Asian sultan. He was a hillbilly coming out of an outhouse. I tell you, some of the best times were at the church manse planning a show. Don sometimes couldn't believe what Chris had in mind for him, but he was always game. The best of all his variety show appearances was a number called Occupations, with Don as the star. Now you have to picture this. He was dressed in his clerical gown, but he was to say that if he wasn't a minister, he was to be a cheerleader. Now, for all of his many talents, Don had no sense of rhythm. His line was, boom, chicka, boom, hey. That became with Don, boom, chicka, boom, hey. But good-natured and humble as he was, he performed and laughed alongside the Central family at the sight of their minister with pom-poms. I worked with Don over a number of years on some of the more serious matters in church as well, and I was impressed by his deep sense of empathy, his ability to understand the feelings of others. He was always ready and willing to step in when needed. He even came early one morning to the Y when I had just finished a workout to tell me that my mother had died back home in Chatham. I know many of you have similar stories, where you just knew you were part of his family. Don was an inspiration to me in all that I did. He was my role model and mentor. To all who knew him, he was truly a great guy, and someone who treasured deeply the concept of family, both close and more broadly defined, as a unit that provides love, support, and stability to its members. We are so very fortunate to have been able to have such a wonderful man in our lives for as long as we did. As I said, mere words cannot adequately describe such a powerful and meaningful life force as our Don J.
I'm honored to have been asked to share a few memories of our dear friend Don. If my memory serves me well, Don and I first met as part of a United Church task force charged with examining levels of financial compensation for ministers. Many newly ordained colleagues were finding the beginning salary levels simply inadequate to meet their needs. Don, ordained 11 years before I was, represented those more established in their callings. In the course of our deliberations, when we seemed to be getting nowhere, I made the somewhat tongue-in-cheek suggestion that, inspired by Jesus' words, "Many who are first shall be last, and the last first," maybe we ought to turn the whole salary scale on its head, so to speak, with the newest in ministry being the highest on the scale and the longer serving lower. Don was not impressed. In 2002, I retired, and Marion and I moved to Barrie, where Don and Chris had earlier on also retired. Our wives had been close friends for years, having at one point sung side by side in the Central United Choir and also delivered Meals on Wheels together. We soon started seeing more of each other as couples and then began traveling and holidaying together. In 2004, the Jays and we, together with Pat and Doug Fraser, well known to many here, went on a wonderful Panama cruise. Near its end, that cruise offered an excursion tour of Los Angeles, which we had elected to take. While waiting in an adjacent parking lot for the tour bus to arrive, it never did. Don and I wandered closer to the water's edge to see what might be of interest there. Suddenly, we were accosted by a couple of heavily armed American soldiers who told us in no uncertain terms to return to the group or face arrest. Now, wouldn't that have made an interesting story back home? 2 Canadian clergy arrested for posing a threat to American security. But the memory of 9/11 was still fresh and the trust level low. On another cruise, this time to the Mediterranean, we were embarking from Venice. We had arrived at the ship a few hours early, and I thought it would be fun to get a water taxi over to St. Mark's Square and do a little exploring back among some of the smaller canals in that area. Dawn, Chris, and I had all been to Venice before, but Marion had not, and I particularly wanted her to see some of the canals and gondolas up close, since our cruise did not include time in that city. The plan went very well, but the crowds in the main square were enormous. When it came time to return to the ship, which we knew would not wait for us if we were late, we found the lineups for the water taxis were a mile long. When we finally got a seat in one, our ship's departure time was looming menacingly close. The water taxi got us to the ship's dock with literally seconds to spare before the gangplank was to be pulled, and we found ourselves running, waving, yelling, and laughing all at the same time, trying to reach it. For more than a dozen years, we and the Jays were privileged to be able to vacation together in Florida, where Dawn and Chris had a timeshare in the Orange Lake Resort near Orlando. Our trips there by car provided us many hours together to chat and to learn more about each other and our families. We enjoyed so many happy times in Orange Lake, in the pools, the lazy river, going to movies, shopping, eating out and in, visiting friends, some of our church family, and walking the nearby ocean beaches. But one evening, Dawn came down with a very painful toothache. The resort recommended a dentist in Orlando who was available in the off hours. When we arrived at the address, it was in a kind of rundown and very dark 2-story strip mall, clearly closed for the night except for a single light on the 2nd floor. There we were met by a rather rotund chap wearing a bright yellow and black horizontally wide-striped oversized sweater, who was the only one in the office, and of course, the dentist. He was a pleasant and very talkative fellow who invited me to come in and sit beside Don, sort of hold his hand, as he went about his work. He seemed to know what he was doing and quickly determined Don was in need of a root canal. With no assistant, he relied entirely on sterile wrapped instruments and soon had accumulated a great heap of the wrappings on his table, making it difficult to find the instrument he wanted. After about 45 minutes or so, he said he was feeling very tired and that he needed to stop for a while. Whereupon he proceeded to turn off all the lights in the office and lie back in a recliner. He did eventually recover enough to finish what he was doing, give Don a prescription for painkillers, and tell him to see his own dentist at home to finish the job. When we finally arrived back at the resort, Don and I could hardly stop laughing long enough to relay to our wives the saga of Dr. Bumblebee, as we affectionately came to call him. Over the years and our many miles of travel together on 3 cruises to and from and within Florida, to Quebec City and Halifax, and to Toronto many times for eye appointments, Dawn and I came to know each other very well indeed. We had lived under the same roof, eaten together, prayed together, worshiped side by side, shared theological and political views, watched golf together, even listened to Dawn's CD of Tennessee Ernie Ford singing old gospel hymns together. And although I was the driver on all occasions because of Dawn's impaired vision, Dawn was never once guilty of backseat driving. Far more importantly, Dawn knew how to express appreciation for love and help given, and did so effusively. Blessed to be a frequent recipient of that appreciation, I shall be forever grateful and continue always to love and to miss my dear colleague and friend, Dawn J. We're going to sing together the 23rd Psalm. I should just say that the 23rd Psalm is one that Dawn and Chris and I and Marion have shared together every time we've visited. And it has a very special place, had a very special place in Dawn's heart and in Chris's. So let's sing that together with joy.
Amen. Is anyone here a Netflix watcher or Prime Video? Hands up. How many here binge watch? There you go. Has anybody been watching the Panthers and the Flames NHL Stanley Cup Series? Hands up. Has anyone noticed how when a game goes into overtime, it gets a little longer? So what I want you to do is imagine you're at game number 6 for the Panthers and the Flames, and I wouldn't be surprised if it went into overtime. Or imagine you're watching Gone with the Wind without an intermission. It is over 3 hours long. We've been here 1 hour and 45 minutes. That includes this last 3 minutes I've wasted your time with. So I have a story to tell. It's a story I told 16 years ago about the Reverend Dr. Donald Ross J. The Preacher's Kid. I've made some adjustments and have a couple of additions, and hopefully you'll be able to hear by 7 o'clock tonight. 4 men, Peter, Andrew, James, and John, lived in the seaside town of Capernaum and made a living, as humble as it was, as fishers on the Sea of Galilee. But a day came, a day that changed everything, a day above all that changed them. Jesus saw them in their boats, and he spoke to them and invited these 4 men, the first of his disciples, to come and follow him. He called them by name. Peter, Andrew, James, John, he said, "Come, follow me." He told them to put their nets aside, to take up a new kind of net. As they had cast their nets to gather in fish, Jesus had cast his net to draw them in. "Come," he said, "follow me, and we will catch people, not fish. Catch them with good news. Catch them with the message of God's love. Catch them that they might have life to the full." And they did. They dropped their nets and followed him. For everything, there is a season. There are all kinds of fishers, and there are all kinds of fishing. On the 7th of May, 1928, another fisher of men and women was born, but no one knew it at the time. Donald Ross J. was the second son and the second of 5 children, 2 boys and 3 girls, born to Reverend Charles J. and Luella J. Don's father had been ordained as a minister in the Methodist Church in 1922. Imagine that, 102 years ago. And was settled at the Silverdale St. Anne's Pastoral Charge near Smithville. Don's father had attended the service on June the 10th, 1925, 9 years ago, at the Mutual Arena in Toronto, when the United Church of Canada was formed. And now a minister of this newly formed United Church, he was serving the Holstein Pastoral Charge near Mount Forest when his second son, the preacher's kid, was born. Don's early days were spent in the communities where his father served as minister, at Holstein near Mount Forest, at Kenilworth Avenue United Church in Hamilton, in the Rockton, Copetown area during the early days of the Depression, and days and years which forged many of the people into greatness. And when Don was 12 years of age, 1940, he was confirmed into the Christian faith at his father's hand. In 1942, when he was just beginning high school, Don's father accepted a call to Perth Avenue United Church in Toronto. And it was here at this place and during these years that his life began to take on new dimensions. The preacher's kid, his whole life was centered around the church, and it was a centering he loved. Being a part of the young people's group, teaching Sunday school and serving as a Sunday school superintendent, singing in the choir with his mother and sisters, and a young girl named Christina Margaret Murphy and her two sisters, helping his father in whatever ways he could, supplying for the caretaker on occasion. They were busy days and heady days filled with fun and friendship and faith, laced with intramural hockey at high school and the fun activities of the young people's group. They kept this growing boy busy and happy. And in the midst of it all, through all of these experiences, unknown to Don, Jesus was casting his net around him and drawing him in, preparing him for something more. For everything, there is a season. Don met Christina Murphy when she was 15 years old, and a year later, 1946, the year that I was born, they started dating. The preacher's kid with the Irish heritage was head over heels with this young girl of Scottish heritage. It was a good match and a good catch for both of them. When Don graduated from high school, he took a year off school and worked at a drug trading company. No, not narcotics like you're thinking, but the forerunner of Pharma Plus. And in 1947, he enrolled as a student at Victoria University, and through the summers, while in high school and at Vic, he worked on road construction and had paper routes and delivered groceries to help pay for school. In 1949, at a time like so many others perhaps, this preacher's kid was unsure of what he wanted to do with his life. His father had a suggestion, and his father was a man whom Don dearly loved and whose wise advice he took to heart. His dad suggested that he offer himself to serve on a summer mission field for the United Church. So Don did just that and was accepted to serve on a summer mission field in northern Saskatchewan. Although he had been reluctant to think about ministry because of his shyness, hard to imagine, something he would outgrow, he left home for the West. He served 3 congregations that summer, rode his bike 45 miles on a Sunday to conduct services in the morning, the afternoon, and the evening. And now we watch our watches, right? 9 to 5, checking out. The advice from his father on setting out in his summer field was this: don't try to be anything but yourself. And another bit of advice was, if you're honest and sincere, people will accept you. So this young preacher's kid served these faith communities who were desperate to have someone care for them by leading in worship and doing just that, caring for them, by being himself in honest and sincere ways. And it was here, in this faraway place, that the words that would shape Don's ministry began to take shape and take hold. They were the words of Jesus. Love one another as I have loved you, Jesus said. Or as Don likes to think of it, care for one another as I have cared for you. He discovered through these formative years and during that formative summer that it is easy to love those who are easy to love. And it is not easy to love those who are not easy to love. But through it all, by relying on God's grace, it is possible, and Don proved that it is possible. It was during this time that Jesus' net was cast even wider, and God's Spirit spoke to Don's spirit. It wasn't a shout, it was a whisper. It wasn't a push, it was a nudge. Somewhere over that summer, and no doubt through all of those formative years at home and in the church that shaped his life, something was happening. And a day came, a day that changed everything, a day that above all changed him. On that day, Jesus came to Don's Capernaum. As he had to Peter and Andrew and James and John, to the place where Don figuratively was casting his nets on that day, Jesus spoke to this young university student. And in words that only Don could hear, Jesus said, "Don, come, follow me, and we will catch people like I have caught you. Catch them with good news. Catch them with the message of God's love. Catch them that they might have life that is full." For everything, there is a season. When Don returned home in September of 1949, ready to begin his third year in his undergraduate studies at Vic University, Toronto West Presbytery was approached to receive this 21-year-old as a candidate for Christian ministry. And so, as it was for those first fishing disciples, this everyday young man said yes to Jesus' great invitation and followed. Jesus cast his net around Don and claimed him. It was a prize catch. And it all began. And in the midst of this, lest you think Don was just a church guy, other things were happening too. His relationship with Christina Margaret Murphy was blossoming. So these two people who had met at church, who had worked and played at their church, who were going into adulthood, also grew in love. And on a May Day in 1951, Don popped the question, and Christina's answer was yes. And 2 years later, on May the 15th, 1953, 71 years ago, at a service held at Perth Avenue United Church in Toronto and officiated by his father, Don and Christina exchanged vows and became husband and wife. and they sealed their promise with a kiss and began their life together. They knew, as they entered this great adventure of marriage, that they would together be entering the great adventure of ministry. It was a life in many ways that they had already lived, growing up in the church as they did. It was a life in many ways that they knew much about, with Don growing up as a preacher's kid in the manse as he did. They knew as much as anyone could know where their lives would be going. On June the 5th, 1954, Christina's 24th birthday, the 26-year-old preacher's kid was ordained by Toronto Conference. For everything there is a season. Don's father at an earlier time had said to Don that if there's any way that you can stay out of ministry, don't go into it. My wife would be able to talk about that. Upon reflection, Don knew, he knew deep within and knew beyond the shadow of a doubt that there was nothing else he wanted to do. There was nothing else he wanted to be. He believed then and always believed that there was no greater privilege or calling than to minister to God's people in Christ's name. He discovered that Jesus was the way to the truest kind of living he could have. And so through the years, Don did just that. After Don's retirement in ministry, and you've heard from the kids and grandkids about the churches he served and the life they lived at home, Don and Chris moved back to Barrie and reconnected with a wonderful circle of friends, mostly the circle that they'd made when they were ministering at Central United. After Bill Fritz left ministry here in 1996, Don served as interim minister. In 1998, when I was now minister at the church, Don accepted the invitation to become part of the ministry team here. He was now the Minister of Visitation and Pastoral Care, and it was in September of that year that Andrea Wheaton joined our ministry team. And I can tell you this, that they were wonderful years for us. And Don, as he had always done, excelled in his ministry here. He has served large congregations in Barrie and Brampton and was just thrilled to be able just to minister and to be free from the administration of those large congregations. On Sunday mornings, I used to tease him about the cross that he wore on his suit jacket that was always on crooked, and I would straighten it for him every Sunday. From the way the girls and the others were talking, I have the feeling that Don put it on crooked every Sunday just for me to get after him. Don suffered from macular degeneration, so a large print bulletin was prepared for him, and if he was reading scripture or offering prayer through the office or through myself or Andrea, we made sure that he had large print things to read, usually that big with 3 or 4 words on a line. Kim and I often visited Don and Chris when they lived in the condo, and more recently at Victoria Village. And I'm saddened to have been witness to their declining health, but happy to know that their children and grandchildren and the marvelous circle of friends has been watching over them. This final little story. There was a time when the Presbytery Oversight Committee did a review of Collier Street United Church. Don and Andrea and I were the ministry team. There were others on staff. It was customary for the members of the ministry team to meet separately with the Oversight Committee. But Don and Andrea and I requested that we meet with them together. There wasn't anything we would say about each other, about the church, that we wouldn't say in front of each other. When the report was shared, many things stood out, but this one in particular. The committee wrote this, that they wished that they could put the loving, happy, caring ministry that they witnessed here at Collier in a bottle and spread it around the presbytery. That's the kind of ministry Don J. led in and shared in. The truth is, we loved and cared for each other, and we loved and cared for the people of this church as Don had done throughout his ministry. I've been honored to pay tribute to the preacher's kid. And in conclusion, these words: his life was a window through which Christ's light shone. His voice was a voice through which Christ's message was heard. His hands were hands through which Christ's help was given. His heart was a heart through which Christ's love was shared. Don was for others all that Christ had been for him. His life, truly, was something beautiful for God.
It's my privilege to be able to offer the pastoral prayer. It's a privilege to offer this prayer in the footsteps and in appreciation of Don and his ministry, his influence on me as a minister. He obviously had a tremendous impact on us as a family, and I represent the Reeve clan and the many good hours of appreciation that we have had as a family. And I know my father is sharing in this the wonders of technology to be able to zoom in and be part of this. So on behalf of our family, our love and appreciation. But it's also appreciation for Don as a minister, who I think inspired me as part of the family. And I remember from back in the 1960s, 1970s, Don was president of Toronto Conference, and he had the Live Love campaign. Do you remember the Live Love campaign? There was these little stickers that he had produced. There must have been thousands and thousands of them, because I saw them for decades afterwards around the conference. It was kind of a very 60s thing, Live Love, and that had a big impression on me as a young person. I appreciated coming to services at Central, being part of that church family, and I appreciated in latter years, now that I'm at St. Paul's in Orillia, being able to bump into Dick and Don at Presbytery. Don and Dick, even in their retired years, were good presbyters and part of that community, and so it was an opportunity to get together and share in our passions and concerns for the church. When I have visited Dawn in the last number of years, I appreciated that when I went to offer a prayer and offered that prayer, Dawn would often end with his own prayer, inspiration back, sharing in a sense of our collective gathering of the Spirit for us in the midst. So it's an honor to be able to offer this pastoral prayer in recognition of Don's great ministry, his being a great uncle to me, a colleague, and a mentor in what it means to be a follower of Jesus. So let us pray together. Spirit of divine embrace, at this time of death we give thanks for the gift of life, for the magnificent beauty of all creation spinning its evolutionary wonder in which we are but a speck. Graced with the opportunity to love and be loved, to laugh, cry, feel its moment-by-moment realities in all we do, we are eternally thankful for this gift of life and what it means to us. We celebrate in this gift the life of Don J. and all he brought to living, for the love he shared and received, for the joys of family, of friends, of being a servant to your divine purpose of seeking the community of heaven on earth, for the small gifts of grace and mercy and kindness offered and given, for the belly laughs and for the sadnesses. For all of this, we give thanks for his life and for our being blessed by it. And so, as we say goodbye to Don's life amongst us and offer it into life beyond life, we ask for your soothing presence that invites us beside still waters, that walks with us through the valleys of uncertainty and even unto death, that soars over the peaks into the radiant glory of sun and warmth and beauty. In the great mystery of your loving presence, that mystery which is the energy at the heart of everything, we pray for comfort and assurances, especially at this time of loss. And so into this embrace we offer our sadness and our grief, but also our remembrances of good times, of being together as family and friends, of boat rides and adventures, of the day-to-day and the extraordinary. All this we remember in what Don offered us. For all of us who share in this loss, we acknowledge the journey of grief, the emptiness and the sadness, the range of emotions, the opportunity to remember and to feel what it is to lose someone so dear. And we pray that we might comfort each other on this journey, making room to express and feel and to walk this path together. And so now, as a community gathered, we say together the words of Jesus, a prayer of challenge and comfort, of assurance in our believing that we will find purpose, forgiveness, hope, and the vision for this life and for the next. Let us pray together. Our Father, Mother, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, the power, and the glory, forever and ever. Amen.
foundation. Jesus said, "For God so loved the world that includes you, me, and Dawn. For God so loved the world, he gave his only Son, that whosoever believes in him shall not perish, but have everlasting life." For Dawn's spirit, we claim this wondrous gift from the God he served throughout his life. Life eternal. In pronouncing the benediction, I'm going to be saying the Irish blessing. For those of you who know it, you're welcome to say it with me. Whenever I would meet with Dawn and we would end our times together, we would always join hands and say the Irish blessing together. So if you'd like to join hands with the person beside you, do. Here is the blessing. May the road rise to meet you, you may say it. May the wind set you back. May the sun shine warm upon your face. May the rains fall soft upon your fields. And until we meet again, may God hold you ever